Hey friends, today's video is focused on one of my very favorite notes in perfumery, sandalwood. I have 10 from my own collection that I'd love to chat with you about, and I'm going to go from the softest and mildest in the bunch here all the way to the loudest, most room-filling, longest lasting, most projecting, heaviest sillage, all of the things fragrance out of the 10. If you're not familiar with sandalwood, it is in the woody notes family and is considered one of the more refined wood notes that can be put into a fragrance. There are natural versions of sandalwood oil and synthetic versions as well. I can't get into that in this video because I am not well versed in that. So I would encourage you to Google if you're really interested in the different types of sandalwood, the ones that are natural, where they are harvested, and how they smell if they're from different regions of the world and all of that. I know little bits and pieces, but not enough to put together for you in a video here. What I can say about sandalwood is that I enjoy the way that it shows up in so many different fragrances across my pretty big collection at this point. And sometimes it'll show up beautiful and smooth and creamy, and other times it feels a little bit drier depending on the other notes that are accompanying it in the overall composition and what the perfumer hoped that you would get as the scent experience and the texture of the fragrance. And so I love that sandalwood is a really versatile note that is used widely across the perfume world and all kinds of fragrances. And you'll often see it featured as a base note. And so it's one that will usually stick around for the length of the fragrance. Sometimes show up in the middle, like it'll pop through in the middle more and into the base. And then in some cases, it shows up right at the top with the top notes, right at the beginning of your scent experience. For the most part, sandalwood is considered to come across a little bit spicy, sometimes creamy, usually creamy, although I said sometimes it can be dry too, and perhaps having a little bit of a musky nature to it as compared to other woods that can feel either drier or a little bit more aromatic or whatever. So let's jump into these 10, and I would love to hear about your favorite sandalwood fragrances in the comments below. By the way, when I choose fragrances for videos like this where it is featuring a note, I try to pick fragrances that really feature the note, where it is prominent throughout the life of the fragrance, where it shows up quickly and stays a while, rather than it being an accompanying player. So I would say the 10 that I have are very heavy on sandalwood, and so I consider them sandalwood fragrances. As with these types of videos, I will pin additional recommendations in the pinned comment below. And I encourage you to go check out the wild, wonderful world of sandalwood fragrances. There's so many beauties out there to try. I haven't tried them all, and I continue to explore through sampling. Enough rambling. Let's talk about the sandalwood fragrances. So of the 10, the classiest and most restrained one, the most edited version of a sandalwood fragrance in the lineup here today is, without a doubt, the newest to my collection also, Santal Basmati from Affinescence. This is one that I have had my eye on for quite a long time. This baby here is so pricey, and so I found it on FragranceNet, and as of the day that I'm filming, it's still available there. It's still a hefty price tag, but a lot less than if you purchase this fragrance retail. And the way that I would describe this is a very soft and airy sandalwood and basmati combination. So if you think about the smell of rice, basmati rice, as you're cooking it, the sort of vapors that come up into the air, the warmth of that, maybe even the dampness of that smell, it has a little bit of like a slightly nutty feel. That combined with a smooth, light sandalwood note is the majority of what you get in this fragrance. There's a real softness to this. And I mean that literally and figuratively, like it will smell soft and delicate on you. The scent bubble will be fairly intimate, and it will be a pretty short-lived experience. I get a number of hours out of this, but it's definitely not an acceptable amount for the price tag. So that's why I have it here at the beginning of the lineup. But the smell of this is so divine. And like I said, such an edited back version of the elemental, beautiful, soft, airy, really creamy sandalwood and like the cloud of basmati rice that's in the air when you're cooking that. Some folks pick up iris. There's iris in the fragrance also. And so for me, that's softer. The primary players here are the sandalwood and the rice. Really pretty. You have to like rice, the smell of rice cooked to enjoy this. One of my top recommendations, though, from the lineup, especially for those of you that work in settings where you need a very restrained fragrance and you cannot be in other people's scent space. You know, you just They have to come up close to you. I'm thinking of situations like the doctor's office and so forth. If you work in a medical profession, if you work in any kind of client services where you're really close to others, you like sandalwood, but you don't want to knock folks out, this would be a fantastic choice. Next here on the softer end of the lineup is a fragrance that I was scared to purchase for a long time because when I sampled it, it had pretty poor longevity and it has a reputation for poor longevity. But a good sale will change my mind every time, and I got this one on a very good sale. This is Fragrance Dubois Santal Complet. Very expensive fragrance, but I will say there are some really fantastic dupes out there on the market. My highest endorsement goes to Juliana's Perfumes. Their version of Santal Complet is really close. This is very much a creamy, soft, musky coconut sandalwood. Beauty of a fragrance. It has a little tiny bit of citrus at the opening. I believe it's a lemon note, but this settles down into one of the most sort of luxurious, creamy, cozy sandalwood fragrances with the brightness and the beauty and the sweetness of coconut and some vanilla. So I regret that I waited so long to purchase this, and I'm glad that I did. And thank you to viewers who convinced me to really give this a fair shot. Some of you argued for this, that it has better longevity than the reputation that it has, and that is true. So it doesn't last quite as long as the ones on the other end of the spectrum. And so some folks feel like for the value, that there isn't value because of the price. However, this lasts longer than the first one for sure, several hours longer. I would say this has more moderate longevity in the 4 to 6 hour range, but it does come in close to the skin where you'd have to hug someone or be in their scent bubble to really get a whiff of it. But it's a pretty intoxicating, creamy, musky sandalwood, just dream of a fragrance. Love this. Next, I'm going to go to a real unisex beauty. This can be worn amazingly across the spectrum, if you will. This is Santal Blonde from Atelier Materi. I've talked about how much I adore this bottle design, how unique and interesting the concrete looking cap is that's sort of brushed with these gold strokes and this gorgeous cobalt blue. It looks black in the camera, but it's like a deep, dark cobalt, maybe even darker than that, like a midnight blue with the elegant lettering. Anyway, I think the design is done well. Very aromatic, soft, elegant sandalwood fragrance. Cardamom, hinoki, which has, it can come across a little tiny bit like an aromatic citrus combination, hinoki wood, along with the sandalwood, tonka bean, some other sweet notes. And I say sweet in just a very neutral way. I don't mean sweet in a very feminine, girly way. I think it just has like a creamy sweetness. Not quite as maybe creamy as Santal Complet. This starts to get into drier territory, but gosh, beautiful. Another sort of soft fragrance. There's moderate projection, moderate longevity here. Very unassuming, very unimposing as a fragrance. Some of the ones we'll talk about on the other end are going to really get in your face. This one is another one of these restrained, sort of background players in a scene, if you will. You know, these are fragrances that you can wear with confidence that you're not going to offend other folks. Can't say the same for some of the ones coming up here. So of the ones that I'm going to talk about today, I would say this, Santal Complet and Santal Basmati are all on the much softer end of the spectrum. These are polite, very polite sandalwood fragrances, very refined and restrained and edited back versions of sandalwood fragrances. Let's make our way into some more substantial players here. So speaking of sandalwood and cardamom is the next fragrance. But before I say that, I left out Santal Blush from Tom Ford, and it is one of my favorite sandalwood fragrances, but I've worn that recently and I've talked about it in videos quite a bit recently. So I thought I would give that one a little bit of a break since it's often featured in sandalwood videos, and it is gorgeous. And I would say that it is a more pronounced, louder, intense version of this one, Santal Blonde, or the reverse, that this is a more restrained version of Santal Blush. They're similar enough that I didn't want to put both in the video, but Santal Blush is one of my top five fave sandalwood fragrances. So this one here is another one that is incredibly popular. Gets a lot of playtime on Instagram and YouTube, and with good reason, although I have to admit that I resisted the lure of this fragrance for a long time. I tried it and thought, I don't think that's for me. I don't understand what all the hype is about. And then decided to try it again and just fell head over heels. and that is good old Gris Charnel from BDK, a fragrance that has been sort of thumping around the YouTube streets, if you will, for quite a bit of time. I did try the extrait version of this, and while I like that also, I feel like that is very intense and leans more masculine, a lot more in the woody masculine direction. For me, I prefer this one, which is a tiny bit more unisex into feminine territory than the extrait version. So this is primarily sandalwood and spices. Cardamom is the primary spice in the fragrance. There's a fig note. I can't say that I pick up a lot of pronounced fig the way other folks do, unless we think about maybe that sort of like background, like fig Newton type of smell. But I don't really consider that like a true fig note, but something in that neighborhood of almost like a toasted pastry deep in the background. And a black tea is one of the prominent notes. So for me, the sandalwood, the cardamom, and the black tea are the primary players, with sandalwood being first and foremost. This is a sandalwood fragrance, accompanied by the spice and the others. I feel like this fragrance is a bit of a chameleon. There are days when it feels much drier, almost in like an aromatic herb direction. And there are days when it feels creamier and in the fall spicy direction with the cardamom. I feel like the fragrance smells like the color of the fluid, the color of the juice, this sort of gray, melancholy, spicy sandalwood that reminds me a lot of rainy days. And people say that a lot and it sounds cliche, but I get it. And I don't know if it's like the power of suggestion of other people saying it so much that I came to believe it myself, but I do now associate this with almost like hazy, drizzly, rainy days. You know what I mean? Where it's not quite raining, but the air is really damp and wet, and there's sort of like that ongoing drizzle of rain that just keeps the whole atmosphere, the whole world wet. You know, it's not quite raining, but it's there, and it's the small, fine grains of grains, tiny, teeny drops of rain everywhere, not the big raindrops. Enough about that. You get that idea, that sort of melancholy, gloomy sort of day, but in a comforting way. I think this is really delightful for fall into winter. I did wear it this summer and it did well. I can see how people don't like this when they try it, because I can imagine it being not appealing. However, for me, as I wore this more, I came to fall in love with this. So Gris Charnel. Moving along, a fragrance that is pretty iconic in the perfume world when it comes to sandalwood. I mean, not quite like Samsara from Guerlain, right? Santal Majuscule from Serge Lutens. So we're getting into bolder territory. And so you need to be a little bit adventurous from here on. The ones that I've shared with you are primarily safe. Maybe some people would think that this one is a bit of a stinker, but if you like it, then it feels like a very safe fragrance to you. I think most people would agree that moving from Santal Majuscule into these others can be a pretty daring experience, especially for folks that are newer to the fragrance world and you're not used to this kind of pretty pronounced profile. The three primary players in this fragrance are pretty intense, and they play equal parts for the most part. And then at certain points in the fragrance, one pops through more than the other. So a really intense, deep sandalwood and rose, and then also cacao. And so the cacao for me is more a player that shows up after the opening. In the opening, you get a pretty pronounced, for me, like a sharp rose. This is different than when I've tried it in the past. Here in the recent year or so, when I've come by to spritz this, because I haven't worn this in a bit, and when I've, sprayed here or there just to kind of remember what this fragrance smells like, the rose has become more and more pronounced in the fragrance for me. The cacao, and again, this is a pretty mature bottle. It's been around for a bit. The cacao comes through probably in the mid more than anything else. And then as it settles down, the fragrance, it's like a combination of the three, a really intense sandalwood, a sharp rose, and the cacao. The sandalwood being the primary player throughout, right? And then the other two kind of peek in and out throughout the fragrance. This one, I would say, leans a little bit more masculine to me. Now, if you have tried Café Tuberosa from Atelier Cologne, it has that same vibe. I'm not saying they smell alike. I'm saying there's something about the intensity of both and the way that the rose shows up in both that they remind me of each other. Some people can't get with this. They find it a little bit too in the animalic direction, too pungent. Maybe some people even feel like it smells a little bit like urine on their skin. I can't say that I get that. I've sprayed it here. Well, this is really pretty, but it's intense. It's intense. So this is a pretty daring fragrance. I have it here sort of in the middle of the pack because It doesn't last as long as some of the others, although I think it has pretty good, moderate to good longevity, and it has a decent scent bubble when you spray it on. But again, this is daring, and I would say this is for my gentlemen in the audience and for ladies who don't mind a daring fragrance that has a good foot in masculine territory. Also among my favorite sandalwood fragrances, and one that I would advise those of you who are Sephora shoppers to check out. This is from Santal Vanille, and this is, no, it's not. It's from Seven Virtues, excuse me, and it's called Santal Vanille, one that became a love quickly. And for those of you that are concerned about clean ingredients and fragrances, this brand is considered to be a clean brand. And I will say that this fragrance lasts pretty well for it to be a clean fragrance. Sometimes clean fragrance means that we miss out on those fixatives that some of the other brands use to make a fragrance last a long time. This one goes in through the evening, and it does have great projection, if you ask me. This will get noticed in a room. I feel like this is one of the smoothest blends of all that I'm going to talk about today. So, where something like this has a sort of quiet refinement to it, this one is a little bit more pronounced and playful as a fragrance. Great vanilla to accompany the sandalwood. This is a fragrance that will, if you're prone to pick up pickle in sandalwood, you might get pickle here. I do feel like I sense a fresh dill, D-I-L-L, the herb. There isn't dill in the fragrance, but sandalwood can sometimes read like that to folks. Cardamom, sandalwood, vanilla, a little bit of coconut. So it can come across creamy on some folks, and I love that it's a bit of a bit more playful sandalwood than the others. So look, the Santal Majuscule, this is a very, very serious, very super mature, intense fragrance. This one has intensity, but it's playful and more youthful. The smell, the overall scent composition is a little bit lighter and brighter, almost as though it has a little bit of a touch of light citrus. I think this is a really, really neat fragrance, and one, if you're just venturing into sandalwood territory, of the ones that I've mentioned today, I would say try this first. Try this first, especially my ladies who are Sephora shoppers. Get yourself some Santal Vanille. Get a travel spray if you want to just test it out and see if it's going to work out on you. If you're worried about whether it's too woody or going to smell too much like pickles or whatever. I don't get pickles, but I can understand how people would sense that sort of dill thing in here. But I think it's so pretty. Here, I'm going to tell you about a stunner of a fragrance. I talked about this in a recent video because it deserves some shine, and it's available on FragranceNet, friends. And so I think it's discontinued officially, but it's still on FragranceNet for like in the $150 range for Santal Cardamon from the Maison Lancome line. One of the most gorgeous, mature, elegant sandalwood fragrances in my collection. It's a glorious sandalwood, a beautiful cardamom, excuse me, the spiciness has come from the cardamom. It's got leather, it has a booziness to it. Some people pick up powderiness. I guess I can understand that. But for me, this gives me like 80s and 90s powerhouse fragrance without having a vintagey feel. Something about the leather feels pretty modern to me, but the sandalwood and the cardamom, and there's also vanilla and booziness give it this beautiful depth, complexity, a lot of personality and character, and it just melds so nicely into my skin. It like melts into my skin, and like my glorious feminine self comes out with a lot of attitude, a lot of punch. However, not overwhelming like this one can be, Santal Majuscule, I don't think. So this is a complex fragrance for those of you that are daring, but maybe not ready to go in the animalic direction, unless you think that leather feels that way to you. I feel like the leather in here is subdued and soft and a nice like accompaniment to the other notes in the fragrance rather than a star player. The sandalwood, the sandalwood and the spiciness for me are the primary players, followed by vanilla, followed by a little bit of leather and a touch of booziness. Beautiful, beautiful fragrance, very elegant. I've worn this many times, and you see that I'm only down here. You only need a few sprays. This is a very strong fragrance. It will take you through the day. In fact, it will fill up a room if you overspray it, and you'll go nose blind to it. So just be careful and do like three or four sprays. I've also mentioned this one recently, and so I won't go on and on. But friends, if you like Le Lion from Chanel, if you like Hail Bop from Tiziana Terenzi, those real powerhouse, strong fragrances, that are smooth and have some sweetness and a lot of punch to them, try Sandal Granada from Moresque. Love the beautiful bottle on this. This is a glorious, for me, glorious combination of a smooth sandalwood, softened up even further with honey, made a little bit sexy and punchy and strong and interesting, with a leather note. Lots and lots of personality, very room filling. Some of you may think this really stinks. My husband doesn't love this. I think it is absolutely glorious. It's sweet, it's woody, it's slightly leathery, it's sweet, it's sweet some more from this glorious smooth honey note. The honey here is thick but light at the same time, in the sense that it doesn't go animalic like it does on some folks' skin, where it can smell like other things. This one stays a very sweet, almost like a perfumey honey. I think this is so beautiful, so intense. So if you can sample this, please do so first. I believe that Scent Split has samples of this if you want to try them out. I don't know where else sells them, but maybe you can go to Etsy. Etsy does samples. Excuse me. You can find samples on Etsy of fragrances that may feel a little bit more obscure to those of you that are not quite familiar with all these different kinds of brands. But this is beautiful, beautiful, deep for the winter, will cut through the cold. Excellent evening affair fragrance, makes its presence known, has a lot of personality. That sandalwood honey combination with the leather sort of off to the side. Like, imagine if the person was wearing sandalwood. Like, if this was a character, the suit would be made of sandalwood. The wig and the makeup would be made of honey, and the person would have like a shawl or something made of leather. That's the combination. Did that make any sense? Of pieces of an outfit that make up the composition of the fragrance. I don't have an original of the next one. I have a really, really fantastic dupe that I have worn a few times, and you will see it. You only need a few sprays. It looks like I've not even touched this, but I've worn this probably 3 times since I've gotten it. This is a dupe of Le Labo Santal 33, and this is Santal's Kiss, a really fantastic dupe. This is a classic sandalwood fragrance. Like, when people think about sandalwood, this is one of the more modern day ones that shows up in people's minds, olfactory memory and all of that. Heavily woody, a lot more just traditionally woody maybe than the other sandalwood fragrances that I've mentioned here. And this is one for which people do pick up a strong dill pickle type of note if they are prone to that. So what I mean by that, for those of you that are newer to sandalwood, you either pick up pickle or you don't. I don't pick up pickle. I don't pick up pickle. Tongue twister, but others do. And so you really need to try a sandalwood fragrance, several, to see if you are that person or not. Anyway, a lot of people complain about that here. This is a woody, deep, like maybe even a sharper sandalwood with some spiciness, a little leather, and some cold purple florals in the background. So this is a little bit of a, I wouldn't call this a warm fragrance. I would call this a colder sandalwood fragrance. Edgy, maybe a little avant-garde. It was all the rage a few years ago, and people that lived in cities like New York complained that they were smelling this everywhere, the way that they are smelling Baccarat Rouge now, and some other fragrances sort of in that family. I do think that this is a really daring fragrance, in the sense that this is maybe one of the first fragrances that was more masculine leaning. I mean, people would argue that this is unisex, but it really does have a lot of masculine touch to it. Yes, of course. Oh, look, all fragrances are unisex, meaning folks can wear whatever they want. But I know that a lot of you appreciate hearing if there are feminine or masculine touches to fragrances, so that you can make some decisions about whether something appeals to you or not. I like the whole spectrum of fragrances, so just know that. But this one is one of the more daring, not this one, the original Le Labo Santal 33 is one of the more daring fragrances of more modern times, in the sense that it sort of did that whole like breaking the gender barriers thing, the same way that like CKB and CK1 did in the 90s. This kind of fragrance did that in the 2010 range, like in that time frame, the decade before this one, where ladies started to wear more woody fragrances, more unisex and masculine leaning fragrances more freely into the workplace and out to special occasions and all of that. Very strong fragrance. The dupe is pretty strong and pretty long lasting too. The original Santal 33 is fairly eternal. So keep that in mind, and very expensive too, which is why I'm sitting on a dupe. But if I find good old Santal 33 on a deep discount, as I always say, it might find its way into my collection. And friends, I'm going to end this video with the most daring sandalwood fragrance that I personally own. If you have others, let us know in the comments. Don't you leave out of this video without telling us your favorite sandalwood fragrances, and especially if you have bold ones that people haven't heard of before. This is from the Greek perfumer Theodoros Kalotinis, and this is Santal Wood. And this is part of his more sort of special line. I think these bottles, at least when I purchased this, they were in the $150 range. I don't know what he has them priced at now. This is the strongest one that I have. Even stronger than Sandal Granada, Santal Cardamom, Melodute of Santal 33. What makes this fragrance unique among this bunch is a very, very pronounced patchouli here, and it's a dry, earthy patchouli without being dirty. Dry and earthy, accompanying this glorious sandalwood, a pretty decent dose of a leathery accord, and also some booziness. And that's what people pick up primarily, and you'll see that on Fragrantica. Those sort of 4 notes or accords are voted the highest, and with good reason, because that's exactly what you get here. This is punchy, this is in your face, this is loud. You're going to get noticed with this on, but it doesn't smell cheap. You know, some loud fragrances just feel like garish and cheap smelling. Not at all. I think this is a really nicely done fragrance. However, if you are not into patchouli, I would skip this. It's definitely noticeable in the fragrance. For me, overall, the composition leans to the drier end, whereas you get a lot of creaminess in this, and maybe like a sense of that ricey humidity, like the vapors from rice in this fragrance. And then some people feel like Gris Charnel has a nice creaminess to it, and I picked that up on some days too. Look, this one here, the Santal Cardamom, this is creamy deliciousness here. Oh, probably one of my favorites in the bunch. I have a lot of favorite sandalwoods. This one is a much drier, rougher smell, but still beautiful. So keep that in mind for this. It smells like the cap looks, if that makes sense, and is the strongest one in the bunch, and probably one of the most artistic ones that I have here. So friends, that wraps up my 10 selections. This plus the little Santal blush, which I decided to leave out of the video this year. There will be other recommendations in the pinned comment, and don't forget to share yours with us and whether you like sandalwood or not. And while you're at it, tell us, do you pick up dill pickle? Are you one of those people, or do you not understand what the dill pickle smellers are talking about? I personally do not pick up the dill and enjoy lots of sandalwood fragrances. As a result, I've talked long enough. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you in the next one. Take care.